welcome to the first webinar series for Power Platform Finance. We're presenting today Chris Barber, who's going to be presenting on row-level security and with hierarchies in Power BI. So just a little bit of an introduction. So Power Platform Finance is a new brand. So we ran a couple of events last year under the Power User Days Finance brand. Got a new website up now, rebranded. And we've also got LinkedIn and Twitter accounts set up, so Power Finance. So if you do tweet about this event or any other events, include the at Power Platform Finance or at Finance Power if you can't find it that way. So the idea behind this is it's a virtual space for people to come together, so virtual and physical, obviously, once we get out of lockdown, for people to come together, for finance professionals, for IT people to be able to learn more about how Power Platform could be used in finance. So Power Platform being Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents, which is missing from there. But once that gets a little bit more traction, we'll definitely include that. And it's really about getting some hands-on experience, getting some learning about how it can be applied in this space, because I think the finance industry is one of the most in need of these kind of tools and automation and accountants to use these, and also it's one of the best places in an organization, I think, to get the most value out of these kind of tools. So what we're planning to do is run these webinars once every couple of weeks, at least for now. We do still have a kind of event scheduled for next month, 22nd of May. We've got some ideas about how we're going to do that. Thinking about how we can run that maybe as kind of workshops or hackathon style. So if people have any ideas and have come across any tools they think work well, please do let me know. But sorry, that's my horse go. In the meantime, we've got a webinar in 2 weeks' time. So 23rd of April, our next webinar we've just announced today. Some of you will know Andrej. It's Andrej with a J, actually, Chris. We need to correct that. But Andrej Latchanji, and it's Jane, I think. He's the CEO of Zebra BI, which is an organization that makes amazing visuals. So these are visuals, like if you ever look at finance visuals in Power BI and you're like, actually, they don't quite work for finance. Zebra BI has been designed exactly for those. So it has those dynamic waterfall charts. It shows variances. It's built in line with some of those kind of guidelines.
Hi, Rishi, I think we lost you. Oh, can everyone please go on mute if you're not already? Hi everyone, I've just popped everybody onto mute just because of the seem to have a bit of background. So that's the future session. Today we're going to be looking at hierarchies in row-level security within Power BI. So it's going to be about 40 minutes, and then we've got about 10 minutes at the end for any questions. So what row-level security and hierarchies is all about is about enabling individuals to see only the information that they need. So maintaining that sort of single set of data set, but then everybody gets a kind of specific cut of that data depending on where they sit within the organization. And this is the kind of the view I kind of like to show on this. So you've got that one sort of set of data which is maintained by finance, and then you've got each individual user seeing their own information. And the reason this is really useful is it's time saving. So if you think you have to kind of send out individual Excel files or individual PDFs to each individual user, that's really time consuming. Also, if you need to scale out as your users grow, that becomes a problem. And there's a security issue as well about sending files around in Excel. And there's some really interesting and exciting developments in Power BI where security, although it's done in Power BI, it propagates through to PDFs, it propagates through to Excel. And some of that stuff's in preview at the moment. It's also very transparent, and obviously it's consistent because you've got that one set of data. So the two sort of main user cases for this are kind of a company hierarchy, where you'd want the parent company or any people who've got access at the top level of the organization to view the parent company, but then each individual to be able to view depending on their level. So you might have somebody at a LATAM affiliate that only wants to be able to see that level of the organization. The example we're going to be looking at today is the other sort of major popular use of hierarchies and security, which is when we look at the employee structure within an organization. We're looking at a relatively sort of straightforward employee structure today, but obviously you can scale it out from here. And this can be for any kind of reporting. So it might be your travel and expenses. It might be your commissions, which is the example we're done today. That's everything that we're going to look at from slides. Everything else now is going to be within sort of Power BI itself. So I'm just going to kick off Power BI.
Just whilst Chris is doing that, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window and we can field them to Chris, and there will be time at the end as well, obviously, if anything we don't get through during the webinar.
Right. So the first thing I'm just going to ask everyone to do is you can, on the Power BI, is mine might look a bit different to yours. So what you can do is you can go File, Options and Settings, Options. And there's a preview feature, which is the updated ribbon. So if your ribbon looks different to the notes that I've sort of distributed, you can just turn on the updated ribbon here. There's a preview feature. It's going to be coming out of preview in the near future anyway. And I've also got customized current theme. When you do that, just be aware that it will ask you to restart your Power BI instance. Okay, so we're going to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to bring in our data. And this is the salaries and commissions data Excel that was distributed. And we're going to bring in the first 6 tables. Now these are all, you can tell tables because they've got the kind of the blue box around them, and these ones that aren't are just sheets. And I tend to use tables when bringing data in from Excel because if the table size changes in length or width, it automatically adjusts. So we're just going to transform that data, and we're going to do a little bit. And when we're transforming, we do that typically within Power Query. So it won't take a long time here preparing the data, but just to give you a quick kind of overview of what we've got. We've got a list of all of the FTSE 100 companies. We've got their stock market ticker, and we've got their sort of their bench, how they're classified as a company. We've got the target information for each individual company. And this is typically how we see data laid out with all the months across in each individual column. Actually, for Power BI, that's not very useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on the ticker, and we're going to unpivot all the other columns. And that's going to give us the ticker, every date, and then the values. And we're just going to rename that date. And we're just going to change the type as well to date as well, because it being stored as a text isn't very useful. The more astute of you obviously already know that this then builds all the steps down here on the right hand side. But actually this isn't the most effective way of transforming this. So we've got the revenue table, which is laid out in the same way. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the change type step that's automatically applied. Generally, when you do your Power Query, you want to leave any changing of any types until the last possible point you can, because it's quite hungry on the service. So we now go right click unpivot, and I could rename these, but you'll see that there's a formula bar up here. It's available. If you don't have it on yours, you can go view formula bar and you can tick it on or off. It's just here, view formula bar, and just turn it on. Really worthwhile having that turned on, even if you don't use it, because as you do your Power Query, you'll learn about how the engine's working in the back, so it'll write the formulas for you. So instead of attribute, I'm just going to change that date. And we'll leave value as, in fact, value, we'll call that, let's call that revenue. Great. And we'll just change date. We'll just change that over to date. Okay, the employees table is going to be the kind of where we're going to spend most of our focus today. And this is really important for the hierarchy, that you've got it structured in the right way. So you can see here, we've got the names of all of our employees. The columns that are really important, we've got the employee ID, but also we've got the manager ID as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to use these 2 columns to kind of traverse up the relationship and work out what the hierarchy for that company is. So these 2 columns are really important to have. Just highlight those for you, the employee ID and the manager. The other column that's really important is what's called the username, and this is used to identify the user who's logged in. So this will typically be, depending on your company, it'll be john.smith@BP or Unilever or whichever company you work for.com, and that's useful for when you log in. That's then used in order to create the work out who's logged in and then apply the security. The other table we've got is just a typical date table. It's relatively standard, such as date, year, month, and month number. And then we've got an accounts table, and the accounts table is telling us who's responsible for each individual company. So we've got the company along here, and then we've got the employee IDs for each month. Again, I'm just going to unpivot this just like I have with the other ones. I'm just going to change that over, in fact, just change it over properly, change that over to date, and the value should be the employee that's responsible. So we've got each individual company, the date, and who's responsible for it. So we're just going to close and load that, and we will do more on Power Query in future sessions, but this is just a kind of a very quick kind of creation of how to get our data in. Most of what we want to focus on today is actually the security itself. Okay, so now we can go to the modeling view within Power BI. This shows all the relationships just here on the left-hand side. And when we go to that, we can see it's already tried to kind of build some of the relationships that we need in our data. So I'm just going to drag them all in. Here. So I'm just going to delete this relationship here because I'm not actually going to need it. So the relationships it's built for us are between the FTSE 100 companies and the target and the revenue. So when we select a company, it's then going to propagate that relationship across the target and across the revenue. I also need to do the same for date because I'm going to need to use one date table to filter both tables. If I just drag from date to target, there we go. And now I've got a relationship between date and both my revenue and my target table. So the other thing I need to do is be able to filter these two based on the employees table. And this is what's going to be key for our security. At the moment, I don't have a column within targets or revenue. So I'm just going to add that column, create that column, and then I'm going to build the relationship out. So we could have done this in Power Query, but we're doing this within this particular function because it's going to be useful a bit later on as well. So I'm just going to increase the size of that so hopefully you can all see it. And we're just going to have the employee response for this individual account. And the formula we're going to use is going to be lookup value. And you can see the IntelliSense has already given us a lot of what we need. So what we need to look up is we need to find the employee responsible. And if I just lay this out a bit nicer, because it's not very formatted very well. So I want to search for the employee responsible. I'm going to need to search the date column, and I'm going to need to match that to the date that's within the revenue table. And I'm also going to need to match it to the company that's in this table as well, which format that a bit so you can actually see what it looks like. Okay, so we're bringing back the employee that's responsible from where we can match the date table in the accounts table with the date table in the current table we're in, and the ticker, the company, where we can find the ticker in the table we're in. So hopefully that should bring back, so it's not going to do it. Okay. Let's just go to my data and just double check that I've done everything correct when transforming. So text to date. So it's basically saying that I've not transformed one of my columns. This is why it's so important to make sure that all your data types are right. So in the accounts column, I've got that as a text column. I'm just going to need to change that over to a date. Now, hopefully, let's just reload that back into the model. And when it's done, there we go. We've now got the employee that's responsible for each of those companies at a specific point in time. Just one kind of quick point of note when we do this, we've actually got different employees responsible for the same account over different points in time. So if we look in December, we've got employee number 3257 in December, but for the same account for Barclays in January, it was company 3231. So we've got one employee is responsible for 6 months and one who was available for the last 6 months. And we're going to need to be able to propagate that too when we do our security. Okay, and then I'm just going to do exactly the same in the target table. And that's just going to be new column. Oh, okay, didn't copy the formula correctly. I'm just going to quickly write this. Again, just going to look up value, employee, employee. Employee responsible, and I need to search again the ticker. I need the ticker from this table. I need the date as well. So I'm going to need accounts date, and I'm going to need target date as well. Terribly formatted, but there we go. So both of those two columns are now in. So if I pop back to my relationships view, I can now create a relationship between my employee ID and my employee responsible. So what we're going to do is just going to quickly visualize that, just so we've got a view, and then we're going to sort of apply the security so it can then work. So just to visualize it, all we're going to do is we're going to take the employees table, we're going to pop their name in the visual. I'm just going to drag and drop that in, and we can just do the same. So with revenue, we can just drag revenue and put it above. And we can also, oh, there we go. So that's not worked. So we need to find out why that's not worked. And then we're going to do the same for target. Okay, so let's just check why the relationship isn't working. So we've got ticker to ticker, ticker, employee ID to employee ID should match through to employee responsible. Okay. Why is that relationship not propagating? Okay. Let's just check why, see if it's down to a data type. So we've got an employee responsible as a number. So revenue isn't as a revenue. I've got the data type down wrong. So I just need to change that revenue down to a decimal number. Target is through as a value. So hopefully that's looking good. So let's just pop that data type in. Okay, apologies. Why have we got this then? So we've got the sum of revenue. So just bear with me a second. Can anyone on the call spot where the error I've made is?
No, it's not obvious, Chris. Real life troubleshooting. I can have a look at this. I can have a look at the solution file if you want. See if you got.
Yeah, open it up. Where I'm just trying to see where I've got the mistake in here. I've ran through this demo on multiple occasions and it's worked every time. So I'm just trying to find out where the issue is. Okay, so the target's working fine. There's something wrong with the revenue. So let's just pop back and have a look at that revenue. Date ticker, that should be text, but that shouldn't make a difference. Date.
You've got your dates in the right format, yep.
Yeah.
They're both dates. And ticker goes straight to revenue and then goes straight to target. So looks like the target's all working fine. Let's just check. Ticker to ticker. Date to dates. Okay, well we can leave it. We can proceed with the target anyway, so I can show you how the security works, and I'm sure we'll come to that. So for security, I'm just going to create a new view. Now you don't need to do this. It's not essential. But what it does do is creating a new view just makes it easier to understand how the relationship is working. So I'm just going to remove everything else from the diagram except target. Okay, so what we're trying to do with the security, let's zoom in here, is we want to be able to filter this employees table. When we filter that employees table, because the direction goes from the employees to the target table, it automatically filters the target table.
So we're going to reduce the rows, and that's why it's called row level security, because we're reducing the rows within the employees table, and that reduces the rows within the target table. In the notes, I've given you the code to do this already, but I'm going to use a program called DAX Studio to write it, and that's also in the notes. There's a reference to that software. It's really useful, and actually it's Power BI is going to be enabling external tools to be connected in the future, and one of those tools is going to be DAX Studio. So if you're doing any kind of DAX intermediate level, I'd advise you bring it in. When you connect to DAX Studio and connect to your model, it gives you all of the tables which are in your model. So you'll see that accounts, dates, employees, etc. are all tables which sit within the Power BI model. And what we can do is we can just drag in any table we want. And if we run it, you'll see that the employees table now appears here along the bottom. So we've got a sort of live connection into our model. So for the security, as I mentioned, what we want to do is we want to reduce the rows within this table. And what we're going to do is we're going to pretend to be Darren. And what we want is a true or false column here at the end. And we want true everywhere where we want to show the security, where we want them to see the row, when we want false where we don't. So for Darren, we're going to try and put true next to his name here. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to define a new variable, which is going to show the employee logged in. And we're going to use, again, lookup value. And we're going to look up the employee ID. In fact, what you can do with DAX Studio really usefully is on the left-hand side, you can just double click on it and it will come up. So we're going to return the employee ID. And we're going to search the username column. We're returning from this column, and we're going to search this column here. I'm going to do that, and like I said, we're going to just pretend for now to be Darren, just so we can test it. But going forward, we'll replace this with something which identifies whichever user is logged in. Okay, so we've got that variable. Whenever we define a variable, you need to return just to bring out your data afterwards. So everything after the return is what's actually being returned. And what we're going to do to the employees table is we're going to add a column, and that column is just going to give us our true or false at the end of it. So we're going to do everywhere where employee logged equals employee ID. Run that code. We now see a true against Darren, so that when Darren logs in, it's only going to show Darren's information. It's not going to show anybody else's, and it's false for everybody else. You can see all the falses, everybody else. But actually, it gets a bit more complicated than this, because although Darren is logged in, we need it to be also to be able to identify all of Darren's direct reports and indirect reports. So there should be 5 people in total shown for Darren. So we've got Darren himself, we've got Lois, Hertha, Taisha, and Junie. So we need a true next to each of these names as well in order to use the security correctly. So how are we going to do that? Well, fortunately, there's a very useful function called path within Power BI. And this is where the employee ID and the manager ID are really useful. So if you trace from the employee ID to the manager's ID, what you'll find is that it will build out the relationship for you, and it will show you all of the different situations where Darren appears and everybody else. So Darren's employee ID is 3233, just here. And you can see under Darren's name, 3233 appears, but it also appears under all of Darren's reports, direct and indirect. So all we need to do now is to show true every time that Darren's ID appears within this path. Okay. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to copy that path, and we're going to say wherever we find this employee in that path, we want it to return true. Now, this is actually going to fail at the moment. And the reason it's going to fail is because sometimes they won't be able to find Darren in any of the links. So if we just encase this in an is error, what we now have is we have a false everywhere where Darren's direct reports are. Actually, we don't want this to say false. We want this to say true. So we're just going to true. I'm going to run that. OK. I'm going to reformat the query now because it's got a bit messy. So DAX Studio is really useful in that it's got this button called Format Query. You saw me struggle with formatting earlier. But actually, DAX Studio, I don't need to worry about it. I can just click on that format and it will reformat my query. OK, so sorry, that should be equals false. Right. So we've now got a true against Darren, and we've got a true against all of Darren's reports, which is what we wanted to see for the security. However, there is one error with this. Is if somebody logs in that we're not expecting, so if we've got F Darren, for instance, it's going to show true in all instances. We don't want that because somebody who logs in that we're not expecting, we don't want them to have complete access to our data. So the way we're going to get around that is we're just going to encase the employee logged in either side with these quotation and symbol. And if we do that for the path and Darren's username, what we will find is it's false now in all instances here. So the include is false absolutely everywhere for this because this employee F Darren doesn't exist. However, the employee, if we search for Darren and we run that query, we now have everyone Darren should see. So that's our formula that we're going to need to use for the security. And we can test that it works for other people as well. So if we go for loner.star at company.com and run it, we'll have that individual line for Loner highlighted. So that's our security. Now I've gone through the formula in DAX Studio and how I wrote the formula. You can actually just grab the formula from the notes. I'm just going to copy this now over, and I'm going to go back to Power BI, and I'm going to go back to my employees table. So as mentioned, what we're going to do is we're going to try and filter down these employees tables just to the ones we need. And the way we do that is we go home, and then there's this useful button up here, says manage roles. And to manage roles, and we're going to create a new role. And it doesn't matter what you call the role, you can call it anything you want. I'm just going to call it total organization. And then I'm going to click on the employees table because the employees table is the table that I want to filter. And I'm going to copy in my DAX logic into here. Now, straight away, you can see why I prefer to use DAX Studio to write the code. It's very difficult to edit it in here. It's much easier to do it within DAX Studio. There's a couple of changes I need to make for this to work. First of all, I don't want it to always use Loner's address. What I want to do is I want to pick up the name of the user who's logged in. And that's using a function called formula called user principal name. Just encase it like that. So we just replace that with user principal name. And then we can just delete all of the other stuff that's table and just leave that is error formula that we wrote in it. And this is in the notes, so you can copy it from the notes itself. So once we hit OK, we can now test our security and check that it's been done correctly. And that's done using the view as. So if we go view as and we pick an individual user, so we can pick anybody we want, but seeing as we looked at Darren, Darren.bussard@company.com, and hopefully, there we go, we can now see that pretending to be logged in as Darren, we only see the 5 rows that Darren should see. So if I just bring up the hierarchy, so you can see Darren, and you can see Darren's 5 reports. And here you can see Darren, and you can see it's like Darren and his 4 reports, so 5 people in total. If I go back to the target that I wrote earlier, you can see that only those targets are supposed to be are showing there. And we can test this for anybody else that we want to within the organization. So if we want to go view as again, and we want to try this out as Lois, in Lois's username, and we can test that the security is working as we'd expect to do. Didn't change it. This. There we go. And now we've got the 1 row, and then when we go back to the visualizing pane, we only see Lois's information. All right, so that's how the security works, and that's how you get it set up within Power BI. But actually, when we share things, it's generally within the Power BI service. So what I'm going to quickly try and do is I just do a quick bit of just going to quickly do a bit of cleaning up the file, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. You can see how visually it's done in the example that I've shared. So let's publish this up to the service. Obviously, normally we'd spend a bit of time visualizing it and making it clean, but for the purpose of this demo, we don't need to. I'm just going to call this example 5. And I'm going to publish it to the Power Platform Finance workspace. So if you're not familiar how to publish up to the workspace, you use the publish button. And whenever you're doing anything with security, you never want to put it to your My Workspace. For obvious reasons, anything that's secure, you want it within a workspace itself. So I'm going to put this in the Power Platform Finance. And that's just publishing up. Should only take a second. Okay, great. So if I now go to Power Platform Finance, let me just refresh that. I'll make it come up. So we're now in the Power BI service. So this is how your users are going to consume the data. If I pick the workspace that I want to look at, which is Power Platform Finance, example 5 was what I called the file. And I need to go and click here on these 3 dots in order to kind of set up the security. So if I go over there and click those 3 dots and go to security, I can now add all of my users to that total org address that I created. Now, you can do what I'm doing here and add users 1 by 1. But generally, you'll have an Active Directory, like an email group, where you've got all of your people in it, and you'll want to add them to that group. Because if you have new people join the organization, you want them to be automatically added into the security group as it comes through. So I've just saved that. And the next thing is a bit hidden, but where total org is, if you hover over, it comes up with these 3 dots. That enables you to go in and test it as an individual. So if I test it as me, what you'll see is that I can see absolutely everybody. And that's not because I'm part of the security group, but because I'm an owner and a member of this user group. And this is one of the most critical things, is when you're setting up your security, your row level security will work. But if you're in a workspace and somebody's got edit access or as a member of that workspace, it will override the security. So for instance, I didn't add Rishi in to the security group. If I test it as him, he can actually see all of the rows data within this report. And that's because if we look at who's got access to this workspace, you'll see that Rishi is an admin on this workspace. So I think one of the really critical things when you're doing row level security is build it in Power BI, test it, but also then remember when you bring it into the service, don't have people who have got access, especially if you're doing sensitive data. And when you're sharing your report, I would generally advise to use apps to share your report rather than trying to share it in share workspaces. You can get yourself in trouble with it. And if you haven't done apps before, you can just click Update App here. And when you do it, you can add in, hide the others. You can add in all your reports into one app. You can make it available for the entire organization. It doesn't matter because the security is going to be applied at a row level anyway. So people can access the app, but when they click on the report, it will be their username, which limits what they can see. So it actually makes no difference whatsoever there. You're fine to enable it completely. And then you can update your app. And with that, you've then got your reports. I know I've just done this as a kind of a one table example, but the principle remains the same when you create it through. The other big thing to be aware of is if you go into, some of you may see this, some of you may not. There's this very new feature called sensitivity preview. And this is the sensitivity that's basically being propagated outside of Power BI. So you set up the security and sensitivity within Power BI, but even though you're accessing the data in a PDF or Excel or several other formats, the security will still be applied. So some of you may see this, some of you may not at the moment, but you can just do that from your settings. Oh, go there, settings, and you'll have a sensitivity label, and your admins within the organization will be able to change this sensitivity label. I'll just quickly show you the Power BI notes on this. You can see what I'm talking about is that even when you export the data, it retains its sensitivity label. And that means that when people access it via Excel, PowerPoint, etc., the security will still it will still require them to, whatever, you might have two-factor authentication when you log in with your user account or whatever. So that's something that's coming. It's not there yet, but it's definitely something to be wary of. Okay, so that was, I know it's quite a quick run through of security. I'm hopefully everything is within the notes. I've had actually some people follow through with it. So yeah, any questions, I'll be happy to take them on security in general. We're able to open it up, Rishi.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Did anyone try follow along as well? Were people able to follow that along? We haven't got any questions in the chat, by the way. Everyone's been
Okay.
quiet.
No, I know that's quite a quick run through. There's a link to the blog that I wrote on this, and there is a full worked example as well within the notes. So if you want to follow the full worked example, and that gives you, I've spent a bit of time on the visualization of that, and it will be a lot easier in terms of, it's a lot more aesthetically pleasing. You don't necessarily need to understand the DAX, but I think it's useful to understand what's actually going on behind the scenes rather than just say, copy and paste this code in and do it. So I spent a bit of time taking you through it.
We've got a question from Ashutosh. Is it possible to share the report with people without adding them into the workspace when doing RLS?
Yes, so I would never add them in. Well, I mean, I would never add them into the workspace if you are sharing it. It's not the approach I would advise. So you can see that in this workspace, there's actually only me and Rishi at the moment. But what I can do is, even though this workspace has only got 2 people in the app, when I share it, the whole organization can view it. So the whole organization can view the app, but they're not in the workspace. And it's if they're a member of the workspace that causes the problems with the overriding the security.
Yeah, that's the overriding. But also bear in mind, if you're sharing it with people who aren't in a row level security group, they won't see any visuals. It will just say the data is not available.
Yes.
So you need to be aware that all the people you're sharing it with, make sure they're in a group. Even if you want them to see everything, just add them into a group that has available to see everything. So you can set up a role that just has true, or something. Then that will enable it for for everyone who's part of that group to see all the data. So the default is to see nothing, not to see everything, which is good from a security perspective. So Lana, yep, sorry.
I was going to say, does that answer the question? Is that clear? Or
yeah, Ashutosh, does that make sense? Do we want to use apps for low-level security? Okay, well, let's carry on the questions, and then Ashutosh, if that's not clear, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or come back in the chat. So we've got a question. So the recording will be available. Yep, we're going to post this on the Power Platform Finance website. Another question here is, what's the best reference material for data modeling?
So I've put it in the notes. I would always say the Kimball methodology. There's an article which is very, very short. So if you look at the notes that I've shared out, right at the bottom, there's a list of references. Should have clicked on the link. One of those articles, which is the STAR schema on modeling. Absolutely. And this article, they are 17 minutes to read, will save you light years of time. So if you want to know about it, this is the way to go. If you want to go into more detail, there's a book called the Data Warehouse Toolkit, which is done by Ralph Kimball, which is, if you really want to get serious, is a really good reference.
I've also actually set up a website and I've put some stuff on there already on data modeling. So it's called learndatainsights.com. I'll put it in the chat if people want to do it. We're going to launch it, I suppose, at some point. There's just a few bugs ironed out with it, but I'll put some stuff specifically on there around data modeling. So which other types of security can be applied apart from low-level security to secure reports in the organization? So apart from low-level security, what else can we do from a security perspective?
So, I mean, one of the things that you can do, I mean, there's a whole host of different sort of ways you can kind of make your reports more secure. One of the options you have within file options and settings options is to stop users from being able to take the data out of the Power BI service. So if you've got really sensitive information, and by default, this stuff is all turned on. So if we go down to report settings, here we go. So by default, you'll see that users can export data out of Power BI. And what you can do is you can change this. So I've had reports before where I've had really sensitive information, and I've just changed that don't allow users to export any data.
Yeah, there is a setting. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, there's a setting overall in your Power BI tenant where you can set export data or set specific people to export data. That if you block that though, it will also stop people from analyzing Excel and share data sets, which are quite good functionalities. So you probably want to, if possible, avoid doing it at the overarching level, but instead do it on kind of full reports that have sensitive data.
And I think this new stuff that's coming is going to be a game changer, because what you might notice when you log into Excel now and stuff, it asks you to log in, and that keeps your security applied through.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's if you export the data and you have it in Excel, and if your sensitivity labels have a restriction where you can't forward that to an external email address, or you can't send on that file somewhere else, then that will still be applied in the data that you export from Excel. I mean, generally with Power BI, obviously, where you don't have this concept per se of object level security. You can apply. You can set tables to false in row level security, and that's essentially to disable access to any of the data in that table. So that's kind of one way, I suppose, around it. But then also, obviously, in terms of content, you want to be able to restrict it through AD groups, as Chris was alluding to, and restrict access to who has access to workspaces and who has access to apps. Bear in mind, in workspaces, you can actually see the data sets, whereas in apps, you can't. In apps, you just see reports and dashboards. So again, that's another reason it's preferable to use apps over workspace access. We've got a question about, can you set up assignment groups for access permissions only? Sorry, Shane, are you talking about groups in terms of kind of, is that the same as the Active Directory groups that Chris was referring to earlier? So assignment groups. So what we can do in Active Directory is assign people to a membership of a group and then use that group to publish the app.
Yeah, so pretty much. So say, for example, just simple one, you might have a finance group or a HR group, and you only want those people with emails associated to that group to access.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely best practice. And that's what Chris was showing. If you go back to the report, Chris, and you can see, and if he clicks on the app and update app, he can type in names there, and then there's also a sales demo group that we've set up in Altius. I'm not actually sure who's part of that, so before you share it with everyone, so we've got a sales demo group. So people who do sales demos, they can anyone who's part of that group can access that. So that's set up through Active Directory. So either Azure Active Directory access directly, or through you can have on-premise Active Directory that's federated to Azure.
The only thing you need to be careful of, I would say, is just to bear in mind is when you've got members who have multiple groups, and you often have that in more complex organizations. So you might have somebody who was in sales and then moved across to finance and stuff like that. You should be a bit careful about who's in which group, or people in multiple groups. You need to have quite a good management of your Active Directory.
Yeah, but that's again, it's all managed through Active Directory, which is the best way to do it, and that's that's why. To be honest, that's one of the biggest features with Microsoft software is that it's integration with AD, right? So that's one of the things to definitely utilize. So we've got a question on how secure is published to web. Oh dear, no, not secure at all.
Not secure.
No, do not use publish to web for anything that is sensitive at all. You'll be able to access the report with. Actually, I don't think you can do publish to web if you've got low-level security. I think it stops you. But generally, don't use publish to web on any of your corporate data. Only use it for kind of public data, or if you're doing something out there in the community, it's absolutely fine. If you're doing stuff for anything on the corporate level, don't use publish to web, because anyone can, with that link, or anyone who could find that link, can actually go in and just access that report. There was a guy called Dave Routier in the Netherlands who actually went and scraped public URLs for publish to web and made a gallery of them. So just to highlight the fact that it's possible to find those, in case people are thinking it might be a secure way. And also asking for a quick example of bidimensional, if possible. So Madhoj, is that asking you wanted to look at an example of how to build a dimensional model?
What I mean actually, like you have one row for flow of information rather than having one flow. What is the benefit of bidimensional
filters? So bidirectional filters.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So
no,
go ahead, Chris.
So bidirectional filters. Well, I mean, if you see anything by the DAX Maestro, so Alberto or Marco, bidirectional, generally you want to avoid it. There's a few sort of real specific cases, but generally you want to avoid making your having bidirectional turned on for your relationships. Yeah, the big reason is because it can create ambiguity within your model. So I think the star schema and modeling it out within the star schema is better than trying to have sort of bidirectional relationships. Don't know if you want to add to that, Rishi, but I would say avoid it unless you're really, really comfortable with the model and really comfortable with what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the reasons you'd want to have done it, in the past, and a very common reason, is if you want to restrict slicer values. So, for example, here, we might have dates going out all the way up until, in our date table, we might have it going all the way up into 2050 or something. But actually, the dates that we want people to select a range from might only be the dates for which we have employees against. So, if we filter an employee, obviously the filter direction will go from employees down to revenue and target, but they wouldn't go on to date because that relationship doesn't go that way. So one way to do that would have been to enable bidirectional filters. But what we can do is on the date slicer itself, we can use a measure as a filter. So we're able to do that, and then that will allow us to restrict the slicer values in that way. Yeah, I think Chris,
I haven't got any measures in this report, but I could add one in.
Yeah. Whilst doing that, we've got a question on Visualizing, can you apply column level security and also combine with row level?
Nope. No, I'd like to know the user case why you'd want to do that. It might be something I'm missing, but no, there's no security for column level.
Yeah, you can do it in Azure SQL. So Azure SQL has the concept of column level security, and I guess that will come through into Power BI if you're using those in a direct query or things like that. So that might be your option for that if you need a use case. But I mean, Shelvin, do you want to? Is there a specific use case that you had for that you want to? To show gender of certain employee or hide gender completely. I see what you mean. So if you've got employees,
yeah. So I mean, one of the ways, I mean, there's a few workarounds for it. Obviously, you could hide it completely and then have a measure. But you can in measures, you can use user groups to use a principal name to limit the users who can see certain measures. So you can do it that way. That's one potential option. But there's probably a few workarounds that you could do.
Yeah. Feel free to get in touch with either of us afterwards, and if we get any other ideas on this, we can maybe mock something up and try and figure out how we could do that. It is a good use case, and I think obviously what you're explaining there is a valid reason why they've put in column level security into things like SQL. But no, I haven't seen it in Power BI, unfortunately. Do we have any other questions? Got a few minutes left. Oh, maybe we can give people a couple of minutes back. Just on the last couple of notes, Archie. So we've got one more question. Oh, okay. So Ned said he has a solution to column level security. That would be
okay, Ned.
Well, that'd be brilliant. Yeah. So reach out to Ned if you're able to share. Ned, can you hide or show a dashboard objects depending on the user who is logged in? So user A sees revenue table, but not the revenue bar chart.
Again, there'd be workarounds, but there wouldn't be anything directly where you could do that. It depends on your user case, which approach I take. So if you had two distinct user groups, I'd probably just do two different dashboards. If you had lots, then you'd have to use measures, a measures table, or some way of limiting your measures depending on who's logged in, which you can use.
Yeah, those would be good options. I mean, one thing you can do is limit people from being able to drill into an underlying report from a dashboard. You can set data set permissions, and if they don't have permissions, if you take off their permissions on the data set, then when they click on the dashboard, they won't be able to drill into the report. So Ned, did you want to say something? Hopefully that answers the question, Steve. Ned, did you want to say something?
No, not really, guys. I was just going to put my email on the thread if people want the demo for column level security. I might make a kind of
or if you email it to me, Ned, that's fine. I can put it up there, and I can put it on the Power Platform Finance site if you want.
Oh, sweet. All right then. Okay. I've just literally put my email on the thread. And then if you do that, I'll send you I'll send you a little. I'll make a little video of it because it's a kind of a solution built around a SQL around having access to SQL and being able to create a kind of a mini table. But I'm sure you could replicate it with a calculated table in DAX, and it does use a measure. So I'll send that to you pretty soon, Rishi. Is that right?
All right. So on the refresh, to create the calculated table, you could use, I suppose, a measure to be able to work out if there's columns on there or not. That's neat. That's clever. Very clever.
Oh yeah. I'll just
ingenuity.
See if I can. Because I needed some. I needed some way to hide personal identifiable information that was in one column to only the people that actually need it. Under GDPR, apparently, if you've got the PII, you can have it in your report, but it can only be accessible to the people who need to use it. It's kind of purpose limitation. I'll just talk like 30 seconds how the broad principle of it. I'm just going to open my one of my models. Oh, by the way, great, really useful material, guys. This has been a great use for Friday evening. in a lockdown situation. When we'd all love to be at the pub. But if you, it does use the if my computer reacts quick enough, I'll be able to just talk you through it right now. So what I did is I had a table called a PII control table, which had everyone's user principal names and as a column, and the permission key as a column. So Y or N or 0 or 1, or in my case it was no PII access and PII access. So I'll just do a quick use snipping tool to do a quick screenshot of that. Do
you want me? I can make you a presenter if you want to share it up on the screen.
No, that's right. It's fine. I've just popped it on the chat thread. So that's step one. And then what you do is say the table I've got that has PII is these 6 months. That's memos. So and then the kind of like here we go. This is good. Hold on a second, guys. The proof in the pudding. Yeah, and it's you use that table, which I mean for me that was a SQL table that I imported from the warehouse into the model. I use Visual Studio SAS to kind of do stuff. But and the second one is basically it's this measure here. It basically says if lookup value, you look up the username. So if you you basically look up the PII control table value against the username using lookup value. And if the return value is full access, you say first non-blank, i.e. the value. And if it's anything else, so no access, it will return a placeholder called PII hidden. So the people who aren't don't have the usernames in that with full PII access see PII hidden. The people do have full access see the actual value in that.
Very clever. Yeah, very clever, Ned. That never occurred to me to do that, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Kind of like, there's it's very much every day is a school day with Power BI. But that was my solution to column level security, which is actually kind of it's actually quite common, I think.
Very good. Yeah. Cool. So the reason you've done that, Ned, is because the DAX columns are recalculated at the point at which somebody opens the model, aren't they? So unlike Power Query, so each depending on who logs in, it will recalculate differently.
Yes.
So that's why we've done it that way, just to be clear. Yeah. Very
cool.
good.
If you notice any security flaws in my plan, do please tell me before
No, it's right. The DAX columns calculate at the point you open it, so it would work.
Okay, good.
Very clever workaround.
Cool. Did it always work at that point you open them? Would that still work on columns?
Columns do measures dynamic, aren't they? So
measures are dynamic, but with calculate columns work and that would it definitely work for people logging in?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to give that a try actually. That'd be
very good. Very good.
Very good. All right, thanks very much. Thanks, Ned, and thanks very much, Chris. That was a really, really useful session to be able to see that, actually. I've seen a few approaches to relative security and with hierarchies, and this is definitely one of the neatest and cleanest that I've seen. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
And just a reminder to the guys on the call. So the next webinar that we'll do is in 2 weeks' time. We'll have Andrej Blanji from Zebra BI. Who will be we haven't put it up there on the website yet. I'll do that after this call over Easter weekend, so that'll be fun. So Andrej will present on visual tips and tricks with Power BI. So say he's a real master of data visualization. He's built visuals around it as well, and he'll if any of you see the sessions, you'll know what I mean. He's a really good presenter at this stuff. So look forward to seeing some of you on there. I'll send around an email once this recording's up on the website, and I'll also include a link to to Ned's session as well once he's put it up. But thanks very much, guys. Have a great long weekend. Enjoy Easter. I know it's not the best circumstances, but hopefully everyone's able to enjoy some more time at home at least.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much. Speak soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks very much. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.